This is Family Twist, a podcast about astonishing adoption stories and finding family via DNA magic. I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey, and we've been inseparable partners in life since 03, 04, 05, also known as March 4th, 2005.
In January 2018, our found family journey took us 3,000 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area to New England, where we now live near my biological father, two half-siblings, and their families. We love being near them all, and the adventure continues.
Well, we made it by a kitten's whisker, but we wanted to acknowledge the fact that this is National Adoption Month. And so here we are at the end of November, and we thought we would talk a little bit about Kendall's adventure in adoption. We've been over this somewhat before. I think it was early in the very first season. But we thought we'd talk a little bit about what his adoption experience was like with his parents. So, Kendall, do you want to take us way back when and talk about Betty and Ruble's decision for adoption?
Yeah, some listeners might remember, but because as Corey alluded to, I've told a little bit of this story before, but my mom and dad had been married. They got married in 1952, my adoptive parents, and they immediately started trying to have kids, apparently. And by the time my mother turned 30, she'd already had two miscarriages, and the doctors were really concerned that she would never be able to bring a baby to full term. I don't really know the details behind that because, to my knowledge, none of her siblings suffered from anything like that. She had two sisters who both had children, so I don't know what was really behind that, and it was such a personal thing that she told me that much, but I really don't know, again, more details. But what I do know is that living through those two miscarriages was apparently really difficult on both of them, my mom and dad. And I know my dad well enough to know that he would have, if my mother were suffering emotionally or physically, he would have been very upset about that. So he told me as I got older that he really worked with the doctor to convince her that, she shouldn't keep trying to have a baby on her own physically. And so that's when they started talking about, the option of adopting. And so officially they reached out to the state of Arkansas to, express interest early on. So this would have been 1964. So they would have already been married 12 years by the time they made the decision to start that process. Things were much different back then. They felt really strongly about going through the state agency as well, because many of their friends suggested that they go through religious organizations, and they didn't want to, specifically because they felt like that was intended for people who not necessarily could afford it more, but probably had more disposable income to throw at that process than my parents wanted to. And they felt like the children at the state institutions might be harder to place. So that was kind of their logic and why they wanted to go through the state.
But they were looking for an infant.
Absolutely. My mother, I think because of the miscarriages, really only wanted an infant. Not that, of course, they understood that there were older children, toddlers, who were adoptable, and that need was there. I just think maternally, she was very headstrong about wanting to experience all the things that a brand new parent, experiences with a baby. And, do I sometimes think that was selfish? A little bit, but I can't know what, a woman who has had two miscarriages would feel. So I don't judge her about that. I just, obviously it worked out well for me that that's what they wanted. But because I was premature myself, so it felt to them like they were getting me at the time that I should have been born. So, for them, it felt very much like they were getting me at the right time.
I mean, obviously, you don't remember being an infant, but what was it like for them bringing you into their extended family?
Oh, it was. Everybody tells me that it was seamless, and I definitely felt like it was as soon as I was a toddler, because again, uh, listeners might not remember, but I don't ever remember not knowing that I was adopted. It was talked about openly. It was talked about honestly and in a very, very positive light. And so there was no stigma in my family. Uh, we could talk about one of my cousins when we were teenagers. We got into an argument, and she was right around my age, and she told me, "You're not even my cousin anyway." But apart from that one incident in my life, in general, nobody, treated me any differently. And in quite the opposite. I was the youngest grandchild on both sides of the families, which were huge families. So I felt sort of special in that respect because I knew I'd always be the youngest and or thought I would be just because my parents were very young in their sibling families. So and I am in fact still the youngest grandchild for my adoptive families. So I was made to feel really special because of that as well. And although I don't remember them, my father's father and my mother's mother were the two grandparents that were still living when I was born. And even though they were both dead by the time I was two, I hear only wonderful things about the fact that, my mother's mother just doted on me and, loved to visit our house more often than she used to, because of there was a baby in the house. And so I feel like it was a really unifying thing for both my parents.
So, how did they go about explaining to a toddler what adoption meant?
Well, when I would see pregnant women when I was two or three or whatever, and I'd point to their bellies, and say, and then I'd say to my mom, "Oh, you carried me like that," or something like that. She was matter of fact. She wasn't the type that was going to say, "Well, we'll talk about that in a few years." She just said, "No, honey, some mommies do that, and some don't have to. Some mommies get the babies after, they're born." So when you're that young, you don't you don't understand exactly what that means. But as I got older, I quickly, figured out that, um, my parents that I looked at every day and loved dearly, that I was not biologically connected to them, at all. But again, because we had family friends, we had my parents had two very, very good, uh, two couples that they were very, very good friends with that had also adopted. So, it felt really natural to be surrounded by that energy. And quite honestly, when I think about it, but before I started school, like kindergarten, most of the experiences that I had were with my parents' friends that were couples that also had adopted children. So it felt very natural to live that life.
How does it get brought up to friends that didn't know or aren't don't have adopted kids in the family?
Well, it's a good point because my hometown is tiny, Gosnell, Arkansas, and everybody in that tiny town, of course, knew that my parents adopted. It was big news, it was exciting and everybody knew. But because we were an air base town, there was this constant influx of people in and out, right? So people that my mom and dad met when I was six probably didn't necessarily know me, when I was born. So there was that constant, I won't call it gossip, I'll call it news, where people would say matter of factly in front of my parents, I'm sorry, in front of me to my parents, "Oh, I just heard that you guys adopted Kendall." So it's a good thing that I did know everything because it was so commonly mentioned in this town, because I think it was maybe to some of the people that were the influx from the airbase, maybe it was novel to them. Maybe they thought it was different, but My parents always knew that I didn't necessarily look like they did, so that explanation probably needed to be there. So nobody ever really hesitated to mention it. It was, and in fact, at our church, which we were a very, very big part of, it was, commonly talked about. And in fact, what I liked about our minister back then is that he held my parents up as a great example of people who quote did the right thing in finding a baby that needed a home. So I mean, again, it's so weird when I hear people who have sad stigma attached to being adopted, because I just honestly, I have never felt that way, never one moment.
And I don't know if you were in the minority. I just know, when I was a kid, it was not something that you heard about very often. And if you heard like a kid in your class was adopted, then it was just, I guess it was just an unusual thing, like, oh, okay. And not really understanding what that meant, not, being a kid and not having the backstory. And then, of course, I mean, it happened in my house, and I'm sure it happened in a lot of houses with multiple siblings where it was like a common thing to tease your younger siblings that they were adopted. One of them was adopted. I mean, my brother was a very sensitive little kid, and I was a jerk. So that definitely was one of the things that the ammunition that I used on him was that he was adopted. Why that would be a negative thing, I, I don't know. Because, I
Well,
mean, ultimately you're saying, like, you were chosen, you
right.
know?
Right. And I guess it's a way to exclude people, right? But being an only child, that was never going to be a thing for me, right? There was nobody else. My parents didn't have a biological child to get compared to at all.
Right.
So it is a different dynamic. And I think I do kind of think about that in relation to blended families where they contain biological children as well as adoptive children, that hopefully those adoptive children are not, that isn't said to them at different points. But even when it was said to me by a few hateful people at school, it rolled right off my back, because again, there was zero stigma for me attached with being adopted. So I didn't care if you called me adopted. I'd say, and what's your point? Your mama's ugly and you are too, so I see where you get it. So that's who I was. And I yeah, it's so, I'm so fortunate. I can tell that, just from listening to other people's stories about how fortunate I was that the town, that my parents' friends, that my church, that in general my school, were just all really accepting environments for me.
Right. Well, and it's been eye opening, I think, for both of us as we've been doing this podcast, talking to people who, are a little bit younger than us or our age or even older or even, 15, 20 years older that have these discoveries of adoption later in life. And it is devastating to them.
Hmm.
It rocks their world. And the journeys they try to go through to heal. It's
Hmm.
just been, we've had several of them, this season alone already.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I have to step back and think about the fact that I have known about my biological family now for 5 years, and it's interesting how connected I feel. So, in some ways, I can start to understand how an adopted person who didn't know they were adopted, loses identity, right?
Right.
They feel like they're part of this family that they think is their biological family, and when they suddenly find out that they're not, you know, truly connected to those people that way, I could see where, it would feel weird. Like if I woke up tomorrow and everybody in my life said, just joking, you're really not a Clark, because that's my biological father's family, it would be devastating, right? Because I've identified with these people and I connect with them in a possibly different way than I ever did with the Austins or the Montgomerys.
Right.
Because when I was growing up, knowing I was adopted, I was never looking for physical similarities, right? I never, I didn't care, I thought my mother was beautiful and my dad was handsome. So I didn't care, that I wasn't biologically related to them. But, you know, as I got older, and sometimes I'd be out with my dad and people would run into him and say, they probably just forgot that I was adopted, and they say, "Oh, I can see the similarities," and we would just look at each other and laugh, because he was so physically dark. He had some Native American in his background, so it's so interesting. And but now, when Corey and I look at the photographs of my Uncle Sean, my biological father's brother, man, it would be hard to deny being part of this family biologically.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, you brought up the blended family situation, and I think that's another unfortunate thing that we've heard about since we've started this podcast is, sort of that Cinderella situation of the adopted kids not being treated equal to the, biological kids. And to me, that's just unforgivable because adoption is not a, like, let's run to the grocery store and, oh, there's a kid for adoption, yeah, and on sale too, well, let's pick it up. It's not a, a quick and easy decision. So to have that happen, to kids or grown adults is just unforgivable, I think.
Well, and I completely agree with you, and I cannot relate to that because it's such a sacred bond that a parent has with a child. That should never be treated lightly. But what I do think, and what I've read about, and I do not mean to stereotype foster parents in any way. I know there are, many, many good foster parents out there, but I do think there are some people who start out as foster parents and are in it for the money, in it for the extra cash that they get to, quote, take care of the child. And incidentally, they end up adopting. So I do see how in some families that does happen, where that child was never intended by that family to be treated as a biological child. So that was not the case with my parents. They got nothing in support from the state. Yes, they did use the state service to adopt me, but there was no continuing, payment. Quite the opposite. I was a sick baby, and they thankfully had really good medical insurance because I was nothing more than an expense to them till I was two. So, but I do hear some horror stories about foster situations that are negative, and shame on anybody that does that. Shame on you. There are lots of other ways to get money, and that should not be the way that you do it. For bad reasons.
Right, right. Well, that gets me thinking about, we've been together for 1,500 years now. And over the years, many a friend or family member, when are you going to have a baby?
Hmm.
Or, are you guys thinking about adoption? And of course, we've talked about it and thought about it. And, our lives have been unusual in the sense that we haven't been in one place, you know, consistently. So, we were together for a few years in St. Louis and then we bounced to California. And I think the California situation would have been tough because of just the space.
Hmm.
Like how do you, would we've had the space for a child, and we were, in challenging jobs.
Hmm.
Now that we're in New England, and housing is more affordable than it is in California, we've got a house that's, you know too big for two people, maybe not two people and eight animals like we have, but still we have four bedrooms.
Right.
And we're sleeping in one with most of the animals.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's, it is something that we've thought a little bit more about, especially as we've gotten older. Like, we're probably getting closer to our final opportunity to do something like fostering, and probably not an 18-month-old. It's probably more like, a grade school or middle school kid who, needs needs that
Yeah.
family stability. And so literally just yesterday, Kendall mentioned to me something he saw online. The Human Rights Campaign is putting on a virtual event, adoption themed, tomorrow, that we're going to attend, and we'll follow up, on social media on how it goes. But I thought it was kind of interesting because it is talking about the importance of supporting LGBTQ plus youth in the foster care system. And we know a couple people in social work, and I don't know, this might be the event that sort of sparks us on that journey.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. And just shameless plugs for this. Check it out on Twitter, HRC, Human Rights Campaign. Um, on Facebook, Human Rights Campaign. On YouTube, it's HRC Media. So just check this out. Corey and I have a really special connection to the Human Rights Campaign. We worked for them in the San Francisco area for years, and only on a part-time basis, but the organization means a lot to us. And in fact, the ceremony when we uh, did our domestic partnership ceremony was actually in the original Human Rights Campaign Action Center in the Castro district in San Francisco. So means a lot to us. And if I think it's cool that they are spotlighting this National Adoption Month event.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the episodes that we're hoping to put together here in the next couple of weeks, not so much a twist, but really about chosen family, and that's kind of how we experienced a lot of that when we moved to California, because we didn't have any family nearby. Well, we did have some cousins and stuff that fortunately we got to hang out with, but not the breadth of family that we had in St. Louis. And even before I moved there, so we won't tell the whole story, but it was super fast. We visited, and within 6 weeks, Kendall was on his way there. So
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, we're the place to stay. But when we first visited there, we stopped by the Human Rights Campaign Action Center just to check it out. And small world, the manager happened to be somebody who I was acquainted with through the media in St. Louis. And so already there was a connection. And he introduced us to a wonderful man named Colton that Kendall became super fast friends with. And Kendall started working there in the weekends, like right after arriving in the Bay Area.
The first weekend after I arrived, I worked Monday through Friday at my new job that was a transfer for me from St. Louis to San Francisco. And then on Saturday morning, I showed up for my first shift at the HRC.
Right. And then when I was there in January, I immediately started there too. So it was, a cool way for us to get to know the city together, because Kendall and I would often work, the weekend shifts together, and a great way to really get into the community and start meeting these folks who would become our chosen family that we would share holidays with. So um, look for an upcoming episode on our holiday adventures with our holiday orphans, as we like to call them.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm really excited to see what the HRC, this event, kind of information has to offer. We've focused on, I think, the DNA aspect of this found family stuff a lot in episodes, and maybe we've neglected the adoption side a little bit. So I think just Kendall seeing this tweet about the event kind of got us both thinking that we need to be more involved in the adoption community. And so we've started our research to see where, put our money where our mouth is, and see where we can do some philanthropy around adoption, because, without state adoption, we wouldn't be sitting next to each other right now,
Mhm.
entertaining you all.
And I think that, of course, it means a lot to us to have the LGBTQ plus, youth being supported by any event. Not that every adoption agency isn't worthy of some recognition. I just mean, of course, for us, that's particularly important.
The LGBTQ plus community and animal rights have been super, super important. And that's where we really put our dedication, towards donating, time and money. So would it be rewarding to be able to help a kid in the community who's been thrown out of their house or another horrible situation? Absolutely. Would we be open to fostering, and if it were a great situation, adding somebody to our family? I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it, lots of people are told that they'd be great parents, um, but we're told that often enough that it makes me feel good about about the
Right.
possibility.
Yeah.
And trust me, we see examples of people that aren't great parents. So in part of me wants to to be the right person, for a child.
Yeah, we can't put that feather in our caps until, we actually make it happen.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that we have, you know, love to give and education to impart, and we're getting older, but we're still fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we add some liveliness to any social situation we're in, and I think we've had enough varied life experiences and just our experiences, living in different places across the country and traveling and meeting people, and that I think we can add a lot of impart a lot of that to a young person.
And I think it could be particularly important for somebody who has been struggling, if we happened upon somebody who'd been struggling because they're LGBTQ plus. I think it's important for them to hear that my very cool parents that were born, my adoptive parents that were born in the 1930s, were going to be very supportive of me as a gay man. And what I mean by that is my adoptive dad, he and I talked about pretty openly, that I thought I was bisexual back then. My mother, told my father before she died when I was 10 that, it didn't matter to her if I were, gay or straight or bisexual or whatever. And so I think that could be really useful for a young person to hear, that I experienced that wonderful sort of acceptance early on, and that no matter where you live, whether you're living in a really conservative place, that there are people out there that will support you.
Absolutely, and I think we're very fortunate that we both now have these large extended families that, for absolutely the most part, are super accepting and don't ask us to do things that would make us uncomfortable, or don't bring this up, don't bring that up, that sort of thing. And so, we do have a wealth of people in our lives that we could, introduce a child to, and help them, you know,
Hmm.
realize that, hey, not everybody's a jerk.
Right. And shout out to my dad. Corey and I went with my sister, Monica, and our nephew, Gage, to see my dad yesterday. And I love that when he introduces us to people, he says, "These are all my kids,"
Right.
and it warms my heart. He's only known us for, 5 years, and he treats us really well. And I know he loves all of us.
Yeah, I've never felt uncomfortable at all around any of the family that we found, since we did this DNA discovery. So, I mean, I know we're fortunate there, because that's not the case with everybody. We know from doing the show that's not the case. I see it every day in the social media support groups.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, we know how fortunate we are. And I think that's, part of the reason we're able to do this show and are able to kind of help people tell their stories. And so it's nice. This has not been, while this has started out as sort of like a historical, passion project for us to be able to capture Kendall's history, it's definitely gotten bigger into something else.
Hmm. One aside, I was recently asked by someone who knows us in our private lives why I haven't had on any of my adoptive family cousins. And I don't know how comfortable they'll be, but I am trying to reach out to a couple of them who might be really helpful in that they undoubtedly would remember more about my adoption, than of course I could. But they were my father's older nieces who were very supportive of my parents when I was born. And I think it'd be really interesting to hear from them to get more detail than I remember, and B, possibly learn more things that I don't even know.
And I know, by the time you're listening to this, we're post Thanksgiving. In fact, you've probably digested all the turkey and leftovers by now. But we're recording this the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and we're very, very thankful that we've been able to um, grow an audience literally around the world. Um, I didn't know that people in Chechnya would be listening to us, but they are, so thank you for that. As much as we love Halloween, we love the holiday season so much as well, and I think the nicest gift you could give this year would be to share this podcast with your friends and family, even if they don't have an adoption or found family situation. I think that these stories that people are coming on and bearing their souls and sharing their heartbreak and healing, I think can definitely raise people's spirits this time of year.
Yeah, I agree, especially with people who, because of the pandemic, are still feeling sort of isolated. I think it could be particularly important.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and please continue to do so as we hit the new year.
Thanks a lot.
Family Twist features original music from Cosmic Afterthoughts and is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.